Good day, everyone. In our last two lectures, we traced English from its Indo European roots all the way to its global present. Today, we're doing something different. We're going to slow down and spend an entire lecture inside just one window of time, the Old English period, 600 to 1100 AD. This lecture has three parts, matching the subtitle on this slide. Part 1, Evolution, revisits the historical disruptions that shaped this period. Part 2, Anatomy, goes deep into the actual grammar, the sounds, the word endings, and the sentence rules of Old English itself. And Part 3, Artifacts, lets us read real surviving texts, including a few lines of Beowulf. Think of today as taking the single Old English column from our earlier timeline and opening it up under a microscope. Let's begin. This timeline gives us four historical disruptions, and I want you to treat this as our roadmap for the whole first part of today's lecture. The substrate, before 410 AD, Celtic tribes inhabit Britain, and Roman occupation runs roughly from the mid 1st century to 410 AD. The Romans leave behind Hadrian's Wall, some early Latin influence, and considerable chaos once they finally withdraw. The foundation, 5th century, the Germanic tribes arrive, the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes we discussed before. They eradicate Celtic dominance in most of the island and establish the core Germanic root language that becomes English. The simplification, 787 to 878 AD. Viking invasions begin, culminating in the Danelaw Treaty. Old Norse vocabulary enters the language, and this is important, the grammar itself starts eroding under this contact. The eradication, 1066 AD, the Norman conquest. French replaces English as the language of power, and this is conventionally where the Old English period ends. Substrate, foundation, simplification, eradication, four words, four disruptions. Keep them in mind as we go deeper into each one. Let's zoom into the foundation stage, the arrival of the Germanic tribes, using this map. 410 AD, Roman legions withdraw from Britain entirely, pulled back home by invasion pressures on the continent. This leaves a power vacuum. The invaders arrive soon after, the Angles from eastern Schleswig, the Saxons from the North German coast, and the Jutes from southern Denmark, the same three tribes, the same three homelands we discussed in our last lecture. The displacement, native Britons, the Celtic population, are pushed into the mountainous, harder to conquer territories of Cumbria and Wales, exactly as the green regions on this map show. The result? 7 major Anglo-Saxon kingdoms emerge, collectively called the Heptarchy. You can see them labeled here: Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, Essex, Kent, Sussex, and Wessex. Despite being politically separate kingdoms, often at war with each other, they shared one common language, which they called simply English. Political fragmentation, linguistic unity, that combination matters for everything that follows. Now, the simplification stage, and this slide gives us the precise mechanism, a real treaty that physically split the country in two. 787, the first Viking attacks on Britain begin. 871 to 878. Alfred the Great of Wessex fights back against the Danes, eventually starving them into submission at the Battle of Ethandun. 886. The Treaty of Wedmore formally partitions England. The Danelaw in red across the north and east, English Mercia in yellow, Wessex in green in the south. Now, the linguistically important part, the Danelaw instituted Danish law and customs across the north and east. But daily life didn't respect that boundary neatly. Vikings and Anglo-Saxons lived side by side, and the friction of everyday communication between two related but distinct Germanic languages rapidly accelerated the simplification of English grammar. When two similar but different languages are forced into constant contact, speakers tend to drop the complicated endings that don't match between them just to be understood. That's exactly what began happening here. This slide compares our two major external influences on Old English directly, and notice they worked through completely different channels. On the left, Latin, arriving through Christianization, roughly 597 to 664 AD. The source is Pope Gregory's mission, led by St. Augustine, and later the Synod of Whitby. The primary impact was orthographic. It changed how English was written, not how it was structured. Latin replaced the Germanic runic system, called Futhorc, with the Latin alphabet. Its vocabulary centered on scholarship, religion, and administration. On the right, Old Norse, arriving through the Viking invasions, roughly the 800s through the 1000s. The source is Scandinavian settlers within the Danelaw, plus kings like Nut, whom we'll meet again shortly. The impact here was structural, not just written. The erosion of complicated inflectional endings, caused directly by these two populations blending together EMR, and its vocabulary went far deeper than Latin's. Indispensable, everyday elements, pronouns, modal verbs, conjunctions, prepositions. So, Latin changed our alphabet and added specialized vocabulary. Old Norse changed our grammar and added words we use in every sentence. Old English was never one uniform language, and this slide maps its four regional dialects plus one genuine twist. Northumbrian, classified as Anglian, was spoken north of the Humber and shows strong Old Norse influence, given its proximity to heavy Viking settlement. Mercian, also Anglian, was spoken between the Thames and the Humber, and notice the label. Mercian is identified as the direct ancestor of present day English. West Saxon was spoken south and southwest of the Thames, and Kentish, southeast of the Thames, was settled by the Jutes and survives in the scantest literary remains of all four. The gray box gives us the twist. The Winchester Standard, a form of late West Saxon, became England's literary standard in the 10th century, under Bishop Ethelwold. So most Old English manuscripts you'll encounter are written in West Saxon. But, as the box states directly, that dialect is not the ancestor of modern English. H. The dialect with the most surviving prestige literature is not the one that actually became our language today. We now shift into part 2, anatomy, the actual internal grammar of Old English, starting with its writing system. Old English scribes adapted the Latin alphabet to represent Germanic sounds Latin didn't have letters for, adding 4 special characters. Let's go through them using the manuscript on the left. Ash, written A, was derived from Latin and pronounced like the vowel in modern cat. Eth, written D, is essentially an insular D with a crossbar, pronounced like the ta in either thin or this. Thorn, written ta, came instead from the older Germanic runic alphabet and was used interchangeably with eth. And win came also from that runic alphabet, representing the W sound. Modern editors typically replace it with our letter W to avoid confusing it visually with P. One more valuable note, scribes rarely wrote silent letters. If a letter appeared on the page, it was pronounced D. The word knight, ancestor of knight from our last lecture, genuinely pronounced both the C and the H. Old English spelling, unlike modern English spelling, was largely phonetic. This is a dense slide, so let's take it piece by piece. 3 separate phonetic rules of Old English pronunciation. First, the consonant rules, the C and G divide. The letter C was velar, produced at the back of the mouth, like our modern K, before consonants. But before I, it shifted to palatal, produced further forward, close to our modern chi. Modern editors mark this with a dot C. The letter G worked similarly, a velar fricative at the start of words before consonants, but a palatal Y sound at the end of words after I, marked as G. Second, fricative allophones, variant pronunciations of the same sound depending on position in a word. The letters F, S, and thorn or eth had no separate voiced letters of their own. They were voiceless like F, S, Th in thin at word endings, but voiced like V, Z's, the in this between 2 vowels. Third, vowels. Old English had 6 short pure vowels, plus distinct diphthongs, each able to appear in a short or long version, marked with a macron. Now, the grammatical heart of Old English, it was structurally a highly inflected synthetic language. Recall that term from our lecture on Proto-Indo-European. This table compares it directly against modern English. Cases. Old English had 5 grammatical cases: nominative, accusative, genitive, dative, and instrumental, with a rare 6th, the locative. surviving only in Northumbrian. In modern English, remnants survive only in pronouns like I, me, and mine, and in the possessive s, gender. Old English had three full grammatical genders: masculine, feminine, and neuter. And here's a genuinely surprising example. The word wef, meaning woman, was grammatically neuter. Grammatical gender doesn't need to match biological sex. Modern English kept only natural gender based on actual sex or its absence. Verbs: Old English verbs fell into two classes: strong verbs, forming the past tense through ablaut, an internal vowel change, and weak verbs, forming it with a dental suffix like d. Modern English retains far fewer strong verbs today. Many decayed into the regular weak pattern. Exactly why irregulars like sing, sang, sung feel like small islands in an ocean of regular ed verbs. This slide might be the most technical one today, so let's slow down. Even though Old English had flexible word order thanks to its case system, its clause structure followed strict, predictable rules. Rule 1: Clause position. Main clauses defaulted to verb second word order. The verb had to appear as the second element, whatever came first. Subordinate clauses, meaning clauses depending on a main clause, defaulted instead to verb final order. The verb moved to the very end. Rule 2: Negation and questions. Old English had no do support, no auxiliary do, the way modern English uses it in "Do you like coffee?" Instead, questions were formed simply by inverting the subject and the main verb. Negation worked by placing ne directly before the verb, and multiple negative words could stack in one sentence purely to intensify the meaning, a pattern linguists call negative concord, still standard today in languages like Spanish and French. Rule 3: Correlative. S. Subordinate clauses use paired conjunctions beginning with tkach, like that x, that y, meaning when x, then y. And wait-at words were strictly interrogative, used only for asking questions, not yet doing the job modern English who or which does when connecting clauses. Now, part 3: Artifacts. We move from rules to real texts, starting with the most famous work of Old English literature, Beowulf. This is a 3,000-line epic poem known from a single 11th century manuscript, damaged by fire in 1731, which is why parts of the text have gaps today. Old English poetry didn't rely on rhyme the way most modern English poetry does. Instead, it relied on alliteration, matching the first consonant or sometimes any vowel sound across stressed words in a line. Look at the opening line: Huet, we gardena in gir dagum. Notice the repeated G sound across Gardena and Gir Dagam. That's the alliteration holding the line together, not end rhyme. The literal gloss reads, What, we of Gardanes in your days, and the natural modern translation is Listen, we Spear Danes in ancient days. The second line, Tiod Sininga, Trim Gefrunon, literally of dead kings, did Thrumfrain becomes inquired about the glory of the kings of the nation. Even in these two lines, you can hear a completely different poetic logic at work, built on stress and sound repetition, not end rhyme. Our second artifact is the Lord's Prayer, preserved in early West Saxon. And this text gives us a chance to apply everything from our phonetics slide earlier. The context box makes an important distinction. Unlike poetry, prose syntax mirrors natural speech patterns much more closely, so this is a genuinely useful text for seeing how Old English was actually spoken. Look at the phonetic memory box. Fader uses the ash character we learned earlier, pronounced a, just like modern cat. Heophonum uses that fricative allophone rule from slide 8. The F sits between two vowels, so it's voiced, pronounced like a V, and forgive uses the palatal G, marked with a dot, pronounced like a Y, because it follows the letter I. Now the lines themselves. Fader ure thu the earth on heophonum, literally, Father ours, thou which art in heavens, becomes our Father who art in heaven. And forgive us ure guiltas, swaswa we forgivath urum guiltendum, literally, and forgive us our guilts, so we forgiveth our guilters, becomes the familiar, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Our final artifact moves us out of religion and poetry into law and government, the Charter of Knut, dated 1019 AD. This document was written by the Danish king Knut, mentioned earlier on our Latin and Old Norse comparison slide, addressed to his Earl Thorkel. It shows late Old English being used for statecraft, the practical administrative business of running a kingdom. Read the opening. Knut signing Gret his archebiscopus and his leod biscopus, and Thursil eorl, and Eale his eorlas, and Ealne his theodsipe, 12 and Twihinde, Gehadode, and Lewede, on Englalande Freyondleis. In modern translation, King Knut kindly greets his archbishops and his provincial bishops and Earl Thorkel, and all his earls and all his people, both those with a weregild of 1,200 shillings, and those with a weregild of 200 shillings, both ordained and laymen, in England. Notice that term weregild, literally man payment. In Anglo-Saxon law, every person's life had an assigned monetary value, used to determine compensation owed if that person were killed or harmed. A higher weregild meant higher social rank. Here, the charter addresses both the 1,200 shilling nobility and the 200 shilling common freemen in the same breath, which tells us something real about how this society understood status and justice. We've reached our final slide, and it's the one that ties everything from today back together. By 1200 AD, Old English texts had become completely incomprehensible to ordinary English people. Remember, the Norman conquest of 1066 replaced the language of government, law, and literature with French, and within just a few generations, the older written language was effectively locked away from most readers. Here's the headline number. Roughly 85% of Old English words are no longer in use today. That's a striking amount of vocabulary loss. But look at what the surviving 15% actually contains, the absolute structural foundation of modern English. The most indispensable elements of our daily communication, basic nouns, pronouns, conjunctions, and simple verbs, are direct, unbroken descendants of the Germanic tribes and the Viking Danelaw we've spent all of today discussing. So, although we lost the vast majority of Old English's word stock, we kept exactly the words we could never function without. That's the real anatomy of Old English, mostly gone from the surface but still holding up everything we say. Thank you for listening.